Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Estamos Aquí, Building Momentum and Capacity to Serve the Growing Latinx Population in Central Florida. I'm your host, Kathy McDonald, Assistant Director for Network Partnerships with the Florida College Access Network. I am so thrilled on this morning's webinar to welcome Dr. Fernando Rivera, who serves as the founding director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub. He is sociology professor and is leading the way with work in the fields of medical sociology, sociology of health, race and ethnicity, and the sociology of disasters. Rivera has been studying the movement of Puerto Ricans to the Central Florida community for over 10 years and has studied the differential patterns of health among Puerto Ricans in the U.S. by analyzing different social indicators such as perceived discrimination, residential segregation, and socioeconomic status and their impact on Puerto Rican health. In the area of race and ethnicity, he studied racial relations among college students, the process of incorporation of Puerto Ricans to Central Florida, and several aspects of the Puerto Rican diaspora in the U.S., including health disparities, culture, and discrimination, among others. A native of Puerto Rico, he continues to be involved in issues affecting the Puerto Rican community, and he is recognized as one of the leading voices with regard to Puerto Rico in Central Florida. Also today, please join me in welcoming Mitzi Gonzalez, who serves as the program manager for the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities at the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. In this role, Mitzi worked on the Frontier Set project funded through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which looks at the role of transformation on the closing of achievement gaps for underrepresented students by elevating the institutional stories to inform the project and the field more broadly. She most recently was serving at the University Innovation Alliance Fellow at the University of Central Florida. In that role, she worked on a variety of student success initiatives, including strategic university efforts to advance UCF's identity as a Hispanic serving institution. Prior to her time at UCF, she served as the Assistant Director in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions at UNC Chapel Hill. Finally, please join me in welcoming guest presenter Zoe Colon, who is the Community Partnerships Manager with UCF's Paramore Education and Innovation District. Zoe's work aims to strengthen a community-centered education ecosystem to ensure that every individual in the Paramore communities excels from cradle to career. Zoe comes to UCF with nearly 20 years experience managing community-based programs in the area of social services, workforce development, children's enrichment programs, and youth development, serving predominantly low-income communities of color in New York and Florida. Zoe is the former director of the Florida and Southeast operations for the Hispanic Federation, where she provided technical assistance to nonprofit serving organizations and managed programs targeting the Latino and low-income population in Central Florida. She served as the executive director of the Community Resource Center, one of the leading immigrant services organizations in Westchester County, for 6 years. She also taught as an adjunct professor for 8 years at the City University of New York. She holds a bachelor's degree from Barnard College and a master's of public administration from New York University. A little housekeeping before we get started. First, submit your questions in the box, which you should see on the right side of your screen if you're viewing from a desktop computer. You can submit those questions at any time. Second, please share what you're learning on social media. We'd love to learn what's resonating with you all. You can find FCAN on Twitter at FL College Access. Please use the hashtag FCAN so we can find you. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. All materials will be available within a week of the recording. We do have the PDF version of these slides uploaded into the dashboard if you're able to. Don't worry if you can't, we'll send them out afterwards as well. Now, we know we've got a few new folks joining us this morning, so very briefly, a little bit about FCAN. Our mission is to lead the collaborative movement to ensure every Floridian achieves an education beyond high school and a rewarding career. Our mission is to build a Florida where education is the pathway to economic mobility for all. We do our work in three primary ways. First, FCAN publishes research and data on promising practices and policy opportunities that strengthen our talent pool. Second is through our network of networks. We have 17 local college access networks that are cross-sector strategic alliances made up of community leaders who come together to create solutions and partnerships that support talent development. They now serve 82% of the state's population. And the third way we do our work is through organizing and coordinating 4 College Ready Florida statewide initiatives. Our work is guided by our 7 conditions for success, which you can find out more about on our website. Today's webinar is a great example of opportunity for everyone, effective use of data and community collaboration. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's get you all participating in a poll. We really want to get a sense of how much the Latinx student success is currently an institutional priority at your organization. Is it strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or prefer not to answer? You can go ahead and vote so we can get a sense of your starting point. That would be great. Let's give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and a couple more votes. Okay, let's go ahead and close that out and share. As you'll see, a third of you strongly agree. So you're already well on your way, just looking for some new promising practices. 47% agree. So that means you're definitely wanting to invest and support your Latino population. So a few disagree and then some prefer not to share, which is fine. Okay, let's go ahead and hide those. Now let's get back to the show here. So let's get started. The Latinos are an important and growing segment of the Florida's population. They currently represent 26% of Florida's population and a third of K through 12. We saw a 76% increase in the number of Puerto Ricans who called Florida home between 2000 and 2010, and that does not include the influx we saw after the devastation from Hurricane Maria. In terms of Florida Latinos in higher education, we see that Latinos enjoy a graduation rate at two-year institutions significantly higher than the national average at almost double. And yet, our Latino students trail their white peers in associate's degree and a higher completion than their white peers. Fortunately, in Florida, we have institutions who are truly leading the way in helping us to better understand how we can support our Latino students so they can succeed in higher education and beyond. And so with that, I am thrilled to welcome Fernando, who will get us started with today's program. Fernando, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the Florida College Access Network for the opportunity to present some of the statistics and some of the efforts we're doing here at the University of Central Florida. Let me start by sort of the premise of our presentation and what we're trying to accomplish here today. As you can see, and I'm going to show you kind of like the numbers in terms of the growing number of the population of Latinx in Florida, but specifically in Central Florida, specific Puerto Ricans. And as you can see, eventually this is something that everybody will have to face in terms of the demographic changes that are happening. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So when you start seeing sort of the growth of the Latinx population here in the United States, you see that it's been a consistent growth all the way to almost 36 million nationally out here, and it shows you at least for Mexicans 36 million, Puerto Ricans about 5.7 million, Cuban 2.3, and others, and I'm gonna talk about other Latino groups as well, but you show that there's an increase in the numbers out here, and it tells you some of the things that sort of the population growth that is happening out here from 2010 and on. When we look at this more specifically in Florida, you see that it continues that growth, but it's a little different in Florida out here when you see that other groups are the ones that are growing faster. Obviously, we have a growing Cuban and Puerto Rican population as well, which it sort of translate a little bit different from what's happening nationally in terms of our Mexican population within the state. But that gives you a sense, all of those trends continue to show sort of an increase in the population. When we look this at Florida in terms of looking at sort of the breakdown in terms of percentages out here, you see out here sort of the diversity that we have in terms of that, but we see that the majority Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexican, but growing South and Central American population as well in terms of that. And we know that some of that population is younger, is our kids in the K-12 system, and younger adults as well. If we look at more profoundly in terms of what's happening in Orange County, where UCF, the University of Central Florida, is located out here, you see sort of the numbers again show sort of a difference. So state, national, it tells you kind of like one trend, then statewide show you another trend. But here in Central Florida, you see that the majority of the growth out here is for the Puerto Rican population. And I think that's important to sort of evaluate what's happening in your community in terms of your student body as well, in terms of what's happening out there and how can you, sort of monitor that, because eventually this is going to translate into this to institutions of higher learning as well. And if we go to the next slide, it shows you that is already happening in terms when you see the enrollment of Hispanics in K-12 schools out here, in terms of the numbers, the sheer numbers. So places like Osceola County, that you see like 61% of students come from a Hispanic background out here, about 43% in Orange County out here. So these are the students that are going to come to are already in the system, and this just continues to grow out here. So it's important that we start recognizing, what are some of the issues that we need to do in terms of responding to some of the circumstances. And one of those circumstances in 2017 was Hurricane Maria. And you sort of have to understand why Puerto Ricans came to Central Florida, particularly they came to Florida per se, is because there was already a growing community out here. So it's always important to look at sort of those patterns of population growth out here, because nobody ever plans for a hurricane in Puerto Rico to be impacting Central Florida, but the way those communities actually interact, they did out here. So if you go to the next slide, sort of kind of give you a sense of the impact out here. This is not geographically necessarily correct, but it shows you sort of the impact that we have. And we've seen that in terms of, the talk of Puerto Ricans in Central Florida, not only as an important voting bloc, but also as a strong member of the Latinx community here in the state, which is a little bit different from other areas out here. And again, we have, back in the 80s and so South Florida, how to deal with the growth of the Cuban population, and even prior to that, and we've seen that the emphasis that we have out here. If we go to the next slides out here, it tells you also about our collaborations out here. And while the population keeps growing in the continental United States, we see a decrease in the population in Puerto Rico. So that brings about, sort of the discussion of what are some of those push factors in terms of that. And we saw that with Hurricane Maria out here in terms of that. So when we look specifically at the next slide, looking at where people sort of came after Hurricane Maria, the majority of them came to Central Florida counties out here. And again, that population that was already here that sort of provided for some a temporary place for the recovery of the hurricane, and for others more of a permanent type of setting out here. So if we look more closely in terms of looking at some of the recent reports in the next slide, in terms of what's happening, as you can see, sort of kind of like that growth that we saw after Hurricane Maria, it has sort of leveled out in terms of that. So we see sort of a stabilization out here. That obviously the hurricane provided sort of that sense of recovery temporarily for some, again, permanent for others. But it shows, that even there's a change in other places as well. So these are issues that we're confronting here in Florida, but eventually other states are going to be facing that as well. So you see kind of like the growth in Texas and all the opportunities that other places might provide as well. So in that September, with everything that was going on on the island, and after the governor at the time sort of declared that students could get in-state tuition, students that were affected by Hurricane Maria, obviously we saw a big response out here in terms of the number of applicants that we have from Puerto Rico, and sort of it provided us with sort of a test of how well was our system out here. So it was sort of trial by fire, but at the end of the day, we were able to provide the resources out here and kind of like giving you some of the numbers out there in terms of that, and sort of the challenges, kind of like moving forward in terms of looking what does that mean for your institution as well, in terms of, you have to create those partnerships with other universities, other institutions of higher learning, because one of the issues that we confronted in terms of how do you read transcripts, and how do you do transcripts when the internet is down because there's no electricity, all those things that were related. And I think that the UCF did a spectacular job in sort of handling some of the things out there. And one of the things, kind of like some of the responses and we can get to the next slide, it's never, we should never downplay the role that students play in all of this, right? Usually we see this as an administration only type of response, but I think in the case of Hurricane Maria, at the time we had strong student leadership. And the Puerto Rican Student Association was a great success story in terms of providing those resources to the students that were coming in, sharing their experience, making sure that felt welcome out here, and they continue to do so. And again, it's not only the Puerto Rican Student Association, it's other student associations that are developing out here for other Latinx groups as well. And I think that's an important aspect in terms of providing, that peer-to-peer capacity for students to be successful as well. Obviously, another aspect of it, and if we can go to the next slides out here, sort of this growth and the impact of Hurricane Maria also demonstrated sort of the need to sort of have a specific areas where we need to concentrate sort of the resources that we have already in terms of that. And if you can look sort of the experience of the Puerto Rican Research Hub, the Puerto Rico Research Hub, in looking at some of those, and we started in the summer of 2018, and sort of 4 pillars that we have, and we know that there's a push for early completion of degrees out here, but what's the role of research? How can we provide opportunities for students to get involved in topics they're more familiar with, but offer them the opportunity to do research? And we've been very successful in doing so, providing students with opportunities to do research, go to conferences, all things that are specific to Puerto Rican topics, not necessarily one or the other, but I have a lot of pre-med students that, due to their curriculum, they don't have a lot of room to take on a specific course, but they can do certain things in terms of doing research. Here at the University of Central Florida, we do have our undergrad office of research allows students to actually enroll in a 0 credit hour to participate in research, which doesn't harm them financially or any other in terms of their transcript or anything like that, but it shows up in their transcript eventually that they participate in research. Obviously, outreach is important as well in terms of looking at that, and the partnerships that we have developed are important as well. So these are some of the issues when you look and analyze a population, how you're going to respond as an institution in terms of using sort of the capacity that you have already, but also creating other things that it can be more intentionally targeted to that segment, growing segment of your student population and also of your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mitzi, and I look forward to your questions. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. And hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. My name is Mitzi Gonzalez, and I had a chance to review the list of participants in today's session and just quickly wanted to give a shout out to all of the amazing educators, college access advocates, interpreters, community-based organizations, funders, and policy minds joining us today. You all are the stars of the show in my mind, and I celebrate you and thank you for the work that you're doing, especially during these times. It's really great to spend the morning with you all, especially as we celebrate the last official day of Latinx Heritage Month. But I really just want to emphasize that we should be acknowledging and celebrating daily the presence, contributions, and impact of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our country. So we must continue to hold our systems that we live in and that we work in accountable to intentionally serve all of its members. I just wanted to start off with that message there. And as Dr. Fernando's research and data shows, which as Kathy alluded to in the beginning, we will be sharing all of our slides with you all. And at least in my slides, I have included hyperlinks to all of the places where I got my sources, so you can continue the great learning even after today's session. But as his research and data shows, there has been a significant demographic growth for the Latinx community in the state of Florida. And across the country, but specifically in Florida, the demographic growth paired with the increase of Latinos enrolling in college, shout out to my college access friends, this has led to an increased amount of institutions receiving the Hispanic Serving Institution designation. Many of you know it as HSI. I wanted to give a little bit, I think it's really important for us to have language is power, and as we are in spaces where people are throwing out a lot of terms, I think it's important for us to know the history of how we got here, but also what that term really means. So in the early 1980s, there was a lot of advocacy work being done to highlight the fact that Latinx students lacked access to higher education, and that the Latinx students that were enrolled in higher education were concentrated at institutions that received limited financial support from federal or state governments. Thanks to the advocacy work of many giants, a new designation of minority serving institutions was created in 1992, and that is the Hispanic Serving Institution designation. And it was created to really recognize the country's rapidly growing Latinx community and in hopes of expanding educational opportunities for this population. So unlike historically Black colleges and universities, whose designation is really based and tied into the institution's mission to serve their students, the federal designation of HSIs receive their designation by enrollment only. So for an institution to receive the federal HSI designation, they must enroll 25% Hispanic Latino undergraduate enrollment full time. Kathy, if you could go back really quickly, I'm sorry. And I think that's important to highlight because it's based on enrollment numbers. UCF, I wanted to give you all a quick snapshot of the growth that UCF has seen just even since 2016. Based on those numbers, we were eligible to be a federally designated HSI in 2016, 2017. But we did not receive, and I say we, I was recently there, but UCF did not receive its federal designation until January 2019. And the reason I point that out is that the number, I'm going to share with you in a moment, the number of HSIs nationally, but that number could potentially be higher because some institutions have not pursued the federal designation of an HSI. There is a process that you have to go through, and I think also preparation internally as an institution or as an organization to think about what does that mean for us to be an HSI. Receiving this title does give institutions access to certain Title V funding. And, you know, many can argue that institutions are receiving these designations only as a response to the changing demographics and geography. And for UCF, you know, I think that they have done an amazing job at really being intentional in serving our students, but also where we are located in the country does help in terms of the enrollment numbers and where the changing demographics due to natural disasters that are happening in our country due to climate change and all of those things. Before I progress to the next slide, I want to acknowledge the great work being done at community colleges across the country, because in many ways, I believe UCF and other institutions are HSIs today because of the investment that community colleges make first in our students. So want to give a huge shout out to them, and that I know they're not represented as panelists today, but want to give just a shout out to all of our many partners across the state that are doing this work and have been doing this work and that model this work for us daily. Another term to keep an eye out for is the term called emerging HSIs. And these are institutions with enrollment between 15 and 24% Hispanic students. So just something to keep in mind if you're thinking about your institution today and they don't have 25% enrollment numbers, they are an emerging HSI. They could be an emerging HSI. And I like to see everyone is going to be HSI just because of the demographic changes that we're seeing across the state and across the country. So merely, before we advance to the next slide, it's really important to know that merely designating institutions as a Hispanic serving institution based on enrollment is not a guarantee that those institutions are serving their students well. We need to really ensure that, and this is again why the collective, I'm so excited to see such a broad representation today from funders, from policy minds, from advocates, interpreters present, because we need collectively to hold our organizations accountable to ensure that there's a systematic, focused, and data-driven effort to support the institutional change that's happening at our campuses to increase Latino student success. And part of that starts with vulnerability internally to say, how are we doing? Let's hold a flashlight internally and say, these are the areas where we need to do better. And these are the areas that we're doing really well. And these are the spaces where we see our partners, which Zoe Colon will talk about in a moment, that we can learn from them. And so I know that we have people on today's call that are not in the higher education system. And my question to you is your organization a Hispanic serving organization? And that's something that I think everyone needs to be asking ourselves. You can advance to the next slide, Kathy. A lot of the information I've gathered today is from Excelencia in Education and HACU, Hispanic Associations of Colleges and Universities. If this session sparks your interest, I'd really encourage you to explore their websites. They have a great amount of resources available that unfortunately I couldn't highlight in today's presentation, all of it, but I promise you'll have a great time, especially if you love data. So the number of HSIs has more than doubled over the last 25 years, and HSIs enroll a majority of the Latino undergraduates in our country. Latino student enrollment at HSIs has more than quadrupled in the last 25 years. HSIs enroll over 2.1 million Latino undergraduates compared to 490,000 in just 1994 and 95. I think this is important for funders to keep in mind, for employers, for city partners, especially as we think about the contributions that Latinos go on to make in our state. And especially in Central Florida, at UCF, most of our alumni stay in the Central Florida area and they stay in the state of Florida. So that's definitely something for the state to think about as our Latino population continues to grow and they choose to stay here and call this home. What does that mean for employers and the economy of our community? You can go to the next slide.
Mitzi, a quick
Yes.
question from the audience. Adriana was asking, where can they find a current list of HSIs?
Perfect question. So actually, If you go to the next slide, that available here link, the source, actually is the 2018-2019 from Excelencia, and it goes state by state, all of the HSIs in each state. So great question, and I included that link there for you, so have fun. I know the numbers on this slide are small, but again, this is a screenshot of the larger data report that Excelencia put out, and that link is available there. But what this slide shows is just a location of where all the HSIs are located across the country in numbers. And if you squint and look really closely, you'll see Florida, it has 29 HSIs in the state. And within the state university system of Florida, UCF, Florida Atlantic, and Florida International University are HSIs. But I think it's really important, like I said, that a lot of these institutions need to give credit to community colleges. And so I want to shout out a few community colleges within the state that are also HSIs: Broward College, Indian River State College, Miami-Dade College, Seminole State College of Florida, and Valencia College. And the list, there's 29, so there's many on that list, but I think you'll find it interesting to look in your state, especially the cities where these HSIs are located. Some you would be surprised. You may not have thought, oh, I didn't think there would be, that institution would be an HSI. And again, it's based on enrollment numbers for undergraduate full-time enrollment. Another topic we could have another conversation about is, what does it mean to be a graduate HSI? Because again, it's a pipeline, right? We want our students have big dreams, and we have big dreams for them as well. And it doesn't stop at just the bachelor's necessarily. We also need to be thinking about that pipeline long term. But this image just really gives you a good screenshot of the types of institutions: 2 years, 4 years, urban, rural, where they're located. So really encourage you to dive into that data set and data report that Excelencia made available. Next slide. So as we move beyond enrollment, the question that many organizations and institutions are asking themselves is, what does it mean to serve? And this is a question that many scholars are doing great research on. And then I know, working at UCF and working closely with many of the HSI champions across campus, something that people within each college are thinking about, within each department, but we really have to get beyond the silos that exist at our institutions. And what is the organization as a whole? What is our commitment to equity? What is our commitment to Latino student success? And it in no means is saying that other students don't matter. It's saying that we need to disaggregate our data for every population, and we can model what it looks like to do this well with Latino students, but we should do it for Native American students, and et cetera. The list goes on. So we need to be looking at our data, so the outcomes of our students, and really questioning that data. And I've had great conversations with IR folks across the country who are doing this really well. Yesterday we were on a call, I was on a call with Portland State University, and they're just doing a phenomenal job at really looking at their data and asking critical questions. And so I hope that other organizations, you know, if they don't have that infrastructure yet, can know that there's peers in our country, in our community, that we can turn to for great questions and partnerships to do this work together. Also, what is the culture at your institution or your organization? Is it one that supports Latino student success, not only for your students, but I think you also need to be thinking about your employees. What's the retention like? What is the representation at all levels of your institution, faculty, senior level leaders? These are the types of questions that when you start asking, you'll really get to understand, are we really Latinx serving institution? Next slide. And so I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great scholars doing really great work in this space. One of them is Dr. Gina Garcia. She's a leading scholar on Hispanic serving institutions and an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I highly encourage you to check out her work. She shares that HSIs can have 4 organizational identities: Latinx enrolling, Latinx enhancing, Latinx producing, or Latinx serving. I've done an activity in several sessions that I've led where I've put this on matrix on a Google Jamboard, and I've let participants vote with sticky notes where they think their organizations live. it sparks really great discussion. Unfortunately, due to time, I couldn't do that with you all today, but would be more than happy to share the template that I've created if that's of interest for you and maybe a team that you have or a larger organization. But it will review quickly what each term means, just so you have an idea, and I'd be happy to share the article where this is pulled from as well. But Latinx enrolling means that your institution, it's pretty much what it says, enrolls 25% Latinx students, but doesn't produce an equitable number of legitimized outcomes for Latinx students, and doesn't have an organizational culture for supporting Latinx students on campus. Latinx enhancing means that your institution enrolls a minimum of 25% Latinx students and enacts a culture that enhances the educational experiences of Latinx students, but does not produce an equitable number of outcomes for Latinx students. Latinx producing means that your institutions enroll the minimum 25% and produce a significant number of legitimized outcomes despite the lack of culture for supporting Latinx students. And Latinx serving means that you have all of the ingredients, right? You have the enrollment numbers, you have the outcomes, and you have the culture that is enhancing and welcoming. Again, I think these are really great activities to do with your organization. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my amazing colleague, Zoe Colon, who is going to talk about the power of community partnerships.
Thank you, Mitzi and Dr. Rivera. Hopefully my sound is okay. Greetings. So we've shared quite a few wonderful, data points and perspectives, and I wanted to add a more community perspective and more details around how UCF as a university, one of the largest universities in the country, and one located in the heart of Orlando, which is the fastest growing Latino population in the state and one of the top in the entire country. Just how we're doing, we just became an HSI, probably going on 2 years now. But we've been doing this work for a while, and I wanted to share some of what's been accomplished, what we do really well to foster success in the Latinx community, but also opportunities, particularly when it comes to building collaboration, particularly with nonprofit organizations and across different sectors. I do want to say I'm pretty new to UCF. I've been on board for about 3 years, working predominantly with the Paramore community, which is a historically predominantly Black community. There is a fast growing Latino population there, but I'm also very active in the Latino community in Orlando. But I do want to share that a lot of this work that I'm sharing out is led by Dr. Fernando Rivera and also Dr. Cindia Muniz. They're really the champions behind a lot of this work. So I don't want to take credit for their work, but I'm happy to share it out. Also, I may have missed some initiatives at UCF because it's just so large and it's almost impossible to keep up. But just to get to our first slide, thank you, Kathleen. We actually have an HSI arm out of our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and that's led by Dr. Cindia Muniz. If you don't know her, she's wonderful, and you should definitely reach out. She leads a lot, pretty much all of our Latino Heritage Month activities. There's a whole HSI week that we dedicate to learning about what an HSI is and fostering that culture on campus. We have Crear Futuros, which is actually a partnership with Hispanic Federation, a nonprofit organization that's based out of New York, but has chapters across the country, including Orlando. There's a Nuestra Graduación, which is a special graduation ceremony for Latino families. And we have Spanish language activities, among other things, during orientation, and that's, I think, a pretty big resource, right? And testament to how important we think it is to really wrap our arms around Latino families and make sure that they feel welcome. A lot of our first generation students, their parents are Spanish dominant. And so it's really important for us to ensure that they feel part of this campus community and that they understand how to support their children during their college career. We have, of course, the Puerto Rico Research Hub, and this is especially important because if you didn't know, we have now more than 1.2 million Puerto Ricans here in the state of Florida, surpassing the number in New York, which is the historic epicenter, which is where I'm from, and soon to surpass the number of Cubans in the state of Florida. And I wanted to mention, and hats off to Direct Connect and all transfer student support, because they're a really important part of supporting Latino students and, you know, students of color and first gen, mostly because they're really coming through this transfer. We're one of the top transfer universities in the country, right? So we have our feeder institutions, Valencia College, which does amazing work, Seminole State, and others that create this pipeline. And so it's really important to pay homage, to honor, or to recognize, I'm sorry, to recognize the work that those units within UCF do to ensure that our, you know, Latinx population is really supported during that transition. I think what's really important as well is that, you know, in addition to becoming HSI, being federally designated because of numbers and thinking about all the activities that we have to support student success, is also thinking about, you know, faculty, how do we foster a sense of community and visibility among faculty. So we have La FASA, which is the Latino Faculty and Student Association. We actually have quite a few Latinos that that participate in Black faculty and staff as well. And we have multicultural academic and support services, MAS, I'm sorry, I added the Spanish accent to it. But MAS is on any given day, I mean, they have so many activities, and that's actually Dr. Muniz worked out of the office as well. And on any given day, you know, when you're walking through the campus, it's a predominantly white campus, so it's more diverse now. But when you walk into Mass, you really see a lot of diversity there, and you know, it's mostly Latino and Black students. So you know, that speaks to me, right? When I walk into a space and say, oh, this is really a place that they feel at home. So I wanted to recognize that in those spaces. External partnerships are really important. So we have Maritza Martinez. You know, she's out doing community relations. She works really closely with national organizations, as does Dr. Muniz, HACU, Excellence in Education, you know, the local chamber, the Hispanic Chamber. I serve on the board of the Hispanic Heritage Scholarship Fund for Metro Orlando, and we have also partnerships with Latinos in Action, where we hosted their you know, major annual event with over 500 young people from middle school and high school over at UCF. So when you see, you know, the presence of Latinos, you know, and you're starting to build that pipeline, and you have younger Latinos, you know, K to 12, you know, on campus and really seeing themselves on a college campus, it's really important work. I wanted to highlight some of the community university community partnerships that are happening. So I work really closely with Hispanic Federation and Iniciativa Acción Puertorriqueña, and we're starting to build relationships with Career Source, Central Florida, and UCF Global. We came together, and Valencia College as well, we came together recently to try and respond to some of the needs around English language learning. So in Central Florida, we have, again, this fast growth, you know, in the Latino community. You know, we see an influx of folks that do have credentials in their home countries, that do have degrees, but are 1 or 2 English classes away from successfully serving in their industries and making, you know, a decent wage. And so, you know, you have your Uber drivers or someone working at Walmart that has the degree in their native country, but they just need to be connected to resources. So the UCF Global staff came together, and we built a community education program. And so they went from having 1 English class available virtually for free, you know, to 17 in the past 2 months. And so that's a really good example of how we pooled our resources. And so Career Source is now working with UCF Global and with Valencia College. Valencia also provides English classes, and all working together to serve the community. So they're not, you know, technically registered in the schools. It's more of a community program, and it's done virtually, and they don't have to pay. So that's one really great example. Last year we had Latino Heritage Month. It was the first Latino Heritage Month event at our new downtown campus in Orlando. So I'm proud to have been part of that. And Mitzi was there, and Fernando as well. And we welcomed, you know, community members. We had actually mostly community members versus, I think, traditionally you see more staff and faculty come to these events. So I feel that the folks that came from those community-based organizations were very proud to be on campus and to be hosted and to see that we were, you know, amplifying, you know, the importance of Latino Heritage Month on our campus and our brand new campus. We've also brought guest speakers from Puerto Rico to serve on panels to discuss colorism and racism in Puerto Rico and the Latino community in general. And that was made possible by the Puerto Rico Research Hub and Alianza for Progress. So that's another example of, you know, another tentacle that's important to talk about, you know, those issues in our community, bringing it to campus and combining like the scholarly work with community-based work. And recently, I just wanted to highlight for us in Orlando that recently the community came together, and just I'm bringing this up because it's important to note that visibility is so important, and building legitimacy, right, is so important in the Latino community, particularly for newly arrived communities. And so in East Orlando, we have this community called Azalea Park, and we have this, and Jackson Middle School is named after Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate soldier. And so recently the community-based organizations came together and really advocated for a name change. And so for the first time ever in Orange County, we are going to have a middle school, or public school in general, named after a Latino icon, and he's an Afro Puerto Rican, Roberto Clemente. And so that will be happening very soon. And I just wanted to highlight that that's a really big win for our community, because when young people see themselves in a name, they feel represented and they're empowered. So next, I'm going to talk about opportunities.
Zoe, before you jump ahead, we have a great question from Joelle, and it's touching on a lot of the subjects that you're bringing up, which is, what advice do you have for high school level educators to eliminate the barrier for students that are undocumented and have limited English language acquisition?
Well, I think, whoa, that's a loaded question. So we need to do better by our documented and undocumented students in general in Florida. So we just need to do better. So that I'll start with that. I do think that there's an opportunity for universities, the way we're doing for non-traditional adult learners, which I'm going to talk about in a second, to really reach out and work a little closer with the public school system to support families in this way, right? And so right now, I think the examples that I gave tend to focus on the adults. But I think that there's opportunity there for major universities and colleges, particularly public institutions, to build those bridges into the community. We tend to operate in silos, and we have a ton of resources. And, you know, there may be that caveat that there's some research attached to it, you know, and I'm learning that every day, you know, working in the university environment. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of mutual benefit that comes from that, right? So, you know, we're constantly putting out grant proposals, and I just think that there needs to be more connectivity to what's happening on the ground. And that's where there might be an opportunity in that space for us to really work with, you know, ESL programs, bilingual education programs, and students that really need, you know, kind of additional support. Not sure if I answered the question.
Thanks, Zoe.
Happy to answer. Okay, here we are. All right. So, so as I said, I feel like sometimes we operate in silos. I actually come from New York City. I grew up in the Bronx, and we had some very established relationships between the City University of New York and community-based organizations. And, you know, I often think about those models and get excited about them and offer ideas for what we could be doing in Orlando. You know, the Latino community is not a monolith, right? We have very different motives for being here. We have different histories in our native country. You know, if you were born there, even if your parents were born there, you're kind of attached to that history. It really depends on the number of generations that you're here in this country, on the state side, if you will. So I think it's important to build those alliances with community-based organizations that are on the front lines, right? And moreover, to develop a strategy that it's not just, you know, we bring community-based organizations to present, once a year, or during Latino Heritage Month, we connect with those organizations that are doing great work, but really to build a strategy that's long-term, that's innovative, and that's intentional, and really leveraging the power and the access that frontline institutions have, and the resources that a university can offer. So working across different sectors, and coming together to really strategize is important. I think that we have our activities, we have so much going on, right? It's really hard, even within UCF, to really know everything that's happening and to coordinate those efforts. So you can only imagine, I can only imagine trying to do this outside of UCF, which is part of what I'm trying to do now. But I'm very passionate about this, and I think it's important. So I think it's important to really be at the same table and think about how to support communities like the undocumented community, like the documented community, looking at the K-12 pipeline and seeing how the university can strengthen, that educational ecosystem. This is what I do with Paramore. So the Paramore Education Innovation District is essentially that. It's, UCF really and partners, because Valencia is a partner, the Orange County Public School System is a partner. It's a cross-sector partnership, collective impact model that looks at what are the assets in this community and how can we strengthen the educational ecosystem. So I feel like something like that could be replicated in the Latino community, so that it's not just sporadic, that it's really intentional, long-term, and that we have the major stakeholders at the table, because there are a ton of resources. It's just pulling them together, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage our downtown location. We have a beautiful campus downtown, and it's shared with our #1 feeder school, which is Valencia College. And I'm a fan of Valencia, woohoo. And so we're, not only a shared campus, with our #1 feeder school, which is an HSI. If you don't know Valencia, they're amazing. And I believe predominantly minority. We're also accessible to communities that perhaps were not in close proximity to the main UCF campus prior to our downtown campus opening up on the east side. So we have South Orlando, which is very African-American, Caribbean, and Latino. We have Hunters Creek, major Colombian and Venezuelan community, and Kissimmee, which is like little Puerto Rico, right? And so there are campuses. Valencia has a ton of campuses, throughout the various counties. Not a ton, but they have a Kissimmee and Poinciana campus, which is heavily Latino. But when it comes to UCF, we're now we're more accessible, and we're working hand in hand with our #1 feeder college. So I think that's really innovative, and we need to do more to leverage that. I also think we, as a university, we've been an urban institution, but we're now really in the heart and soul of downtown Orlando, right? In closer proximity to lower income and first generation students. I really think that we need to think about what it means to be an urban institution and how to support first gen communities of color. And how to, develop a space or offer spaces to have meaningful exchange with our community and help preserve the histories and amplify those stories and experiences as we see with other major universities across the country. And finally, I do think that there's an opportunity now, particularly in the face of this pandemic and the economic impact on communities of color, of the pandemic, to really think through how we can engage those non-traditional learners that have lost their jobs or are underemployed now because of this pandemic, career changers that are now saying, wow, I'm in a very vulnerable industry. I really need to reevaluate if this is a good move for me. And newly arrived immigrants, we are now working with UCF Continuing Ed and UCF Global to see how we can, better support and engage non-traditional adult learners. And finally, the Latinx population, we're the youngest population in the country. There's thousands of working age adults arriving into our state weekly. And it's pretty clear, Estamos Aquí, we are here. That's certainly most appropriate. And our community has said presente, and we just need to continue to think of ways to celebrate that and support this community, and also build bridges with other communities of color, and make sure that we're at that table together and that we build power. And so I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Zoe. We're getting some, I'm going to skip us ahead to questions because we're getting some great questions coming in, and I want to make sure we have time for those. First, David's asking, is data available that shows what is the most successful path for Latinx students completing undergraduate and graduate degrees? So that's number one. And our state college transfers to four-year institutions completing at higher rates than first time in college Latinx students matriculating directly into undergraduate programs at four-year institutions. Are Latinx students taking advantage of dual enrollment while in high school? And if yes, are their programs completing at higher rates? And what is the typical starting point for Latinx students pursuing and completing graduate degrees? Is it state college or four-year institutions? So there's several questions in there, but just wanted to get y'all started.
I don't consider myself to be the data guru, but what I will say is that it does speak to the need to have a comprehensive and very specific targeted investment in getting the data around Latinx student success. And so I'll say that in general, not just at UCF, but just in general looking at, and I think we have some of that with Excelencia, but I wonder if we have it for Florida. So I'll stop there because I know my colleagues probably have more information.
Great.
Something I'll note is that at UCF, we're lucky in this fact that it's led by one great team, Dr. Paige Borden, awesome team there. But they have dashboards that are actually available to there's some that are only available to the UCF community. You have to have a login, but then there are others that are completely available and accessible to the public. And so I would really encourage you to look at HSIs and to see their IR capacity and to start disaggregating the data yourself. You can play with it a lot. I don't know all the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that UCF is doing actually our retention rate this past year for Latino students first time in college was, I think, 92.6%, which is really great when you look at compared to across the country. And that's, I think, for African Americans, it was 92.3%. So in terms of UCF is really working hard to close those equity gaps. And I think in some cases we have already closed the equity gaps, but again, my thing is about sustainability. Just because you hit that one year, something could happen the next year. You cannot let up. And so data is something that's fluid that you have to continue to revisit and never just get, okay, we did it. We're an HSI now. What's next? You have to continuously be in a practice of, again, institutionalizing this. Like, this is our practice. This is what we do daily. So I'm sorry, I can't get, Kathy, if you could send those questions to us, I'd be happy to do some of that digging for you and send it out. But I would start there. There are a lot of dashboards that are available to the public. And Fernando, if you want to add anything, please do.
Yeah, no, I think as we continue this growth, right now, one of the frustrations in terms of getting data is that we tend to lump everybody together, and it makes it really difficult, with the labels that we have in terms of, especially for Latinx populations, right? The issues that might be working with Puerto Rican students might not be the same with, let's say, undocumented students that are sort of dealing with other sets of issues. And I think this is sort of kind of like the push that we know that students are already at our doors, so how do we open that to different data type of things, that we can have those dashboards and people can make those distinctions in terms of that, which I think is important. And sometimes, there's great efforts by Excelencia in Education trying to disseminate some of that data, but still we have there's still some restrictions in terms of how easily available is that data. And I think that varies by state, it varies by institution. And I think when we're intentional, that's how we're serving our students, right? So the more information we have that we can disaggregate is going to make it easier for people to make those type of decisions and know more about what is the most successful path.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, which is, what do you recommend for high school to do in assisting Latino students to go to college in creating more of an HSI setting at the high school level? So, and then also assisting students who have the barrier of not passing the FSA. Oops, sorry, I can't see all of their question. yeah, it's not continuing beyond that, but passing the FSA.
I'll say two things real quick, and I know Zoe does a lot of great work in high schools and she has some great partnerships. But one, working with your state to get testing in students' native language is huge. Another thing I would say is looking at your curriculum. Are you incorporating Latinx authors in your readings and celebrating, you know, beyond just Latinx Heritage Month? Who are you? What figures are you talking about and discussing, and what authors are you letting your students learn about and read from? Those would be two things I said. Really examine your curriculum and work with your state to get some legislation passed that supports Latinx students.
I agree. It's about not feeling invisible. I feel like when young people don't see themselves in the curriculum, you know, in the faculty and the staff, you know, it really undermines who we are as a people. And, you know, we have the media to do that already, right? So, you know, we have, you know, so many political, you know, climatic issues to already feel that way. And so the more that we empower our youth and reaffirm how important it is for them to be themselves, and that could be a young person with an accent, you know, that, you know, we have wonderful programs, Latinos in Action nationally, that's in some of the high schools here, and even middle schools. You know, young people need to see themselves and feel validated to succeed. And I know studies have shown that, you know, that when you feel really secure about who you are and your identity, you actually do better academically. And so I think that's really important, you know, incorporating, you know, courses that talk about race and ethnicity and gender and class, you know, especially now with the Black Lives Matter movement. Young people are really trying to process all of this and maybe not even understanding. So I think that's really important, that educational piece that we don't get in a traditional classroom setting.
And lastly, familia. I was gonna say familia as well. Like, and make sure you're incorporating family as partners, because they're a huge part of students' decision-making process.
And I think I would say also partnerships with your local universities and community colleges. I have had the opportunity to talk to high school groups, and I think that makes a profound change, right? That it could be achievable, and there are people that, you know, understand what some of the issues that you might be going through. And I think we have to do, at least for my role as professor, is we have to do a better job of getting outside of our immediate context and actually going down to these community groups, going down to schools, going down to different activities. So that's kind of like my recommendation as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fernanda Riviera, Zoe Colon, and Mitzi Gonzalez for joining us today. Such great information. I'm proud of the progress we're making in Florida. We have more work to do, but you all are giving us a snapshot into the foundation that's being built and will continue to be built from here. So great examples. I appreciate that. For all of you who have dialed in, if you are not already a subscriber to the Florida College Access Network, I encourage you to do so. That way you stay informed of upcoming webinars like this, policy briefs coming out, legislative updates, all the great things that we have in store for you all. So with that, thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful week, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Take care now. Bye.